My husband filed for divorce Monday morning. By Wednesday, my badge was dead at my own boardroom door. The board called me a fiduciary risk, a leaked merger deck, a $4.8 billion deal, and a marriage that just collapsed in public. I built every page of that deck. 9 years in that room. He turned it into 3 days. The board had a real transaction to protect. I understand that. What they didn't ask, what no one asked, was whether the leak and the divorce arrived together on purpose. So I started documenting every access change, every timestamp, before anyone told me. You'll say the board did what boards do. Maybe. But ask yourself, would you have stayed quiet and trusted the record? Because I did, and it almost cost me everything. Let me take you back to Monday morning, when the badge still worked and the war room door was still open, and I was still just a chief strategy officer 11 months into the biggest deal of my career. 7 a.m. I was already at my desk. That's the part I keep coming back to. 7 a.m. on a Monday. Coffee I'd made myself at home because the building's espresso machine was always a 15-minute wait. My laptop already open. The deal team's war room 3 doors down. I could see them through the glass. 6 people, whiteboards. The particular kind of focus that settles over a room when money in the billions is 4 working days from closing. My name was on that calendar. I'd put it there. I'm Sora, and for 9 years I'd been the person in that company who understood what the company was trying to become before it understood it itself. I built the strategic framework for the Meridian acquisition when it was still a conversation in a conference room that Corvin and I drove home from separately because we were fighting about something I can't even remember now. I turned that conversation into a 140-page deck. I turned that deck into a transaction. The war room 3 doors down existed because I built the argument for why it should. I didn't walk in at 7 a.m. I watched through the glass and stayed at my desk because I knew, even then, before the papers arrived, before the portal loaded wrong, I knew that boardrooms in the final week of a close are not places where personal instability is forgiven. You don't bring a marriage into a deal room. You don't give the room anything it can use. I'd learned that a long time ago. At 9:14, a courier arrived at my assistant's desk. I saw the envelope from where I was sitting. I recognized the return address, my husband's attorney's office. I signed for it, put it in my bag, and zipped the bag closed. My assistant, she's been with me 4 years. She knows how to read a room. She handed me a coffee and did not say a word. That's how you learn to be useful to someone like me. You learn that silence can be the kindest thing. I walked into the war room at 9:22 with the divorce papers in my bag and a deal timeline on my screen. I sat down at the table and I asked about the updated due diligence schedule, and someone slid me a revised close calendar, and we talked about documentation sequencing for 40 minutes. The envelope stayed in my bag. Here's something about large institutions in the final window of a major transaction. They don't slow down for anything personal. They can't. A $4.8 billion deal has its own gravity. You either orbit it or you don't. I'd been orbiting it for 11 months. I was not going to stop because my husband chose Monday morning to file. He knew that. He counted on it. I was back at my desk by 11. The war room door was still open. I could still see the whiteboards. My name was still on the calendar. At 4:47 p.m., I logged into the board portal to review the final version of the deal summary, standard end-of-day check, something I'd done dozens of times in the past 11 months. The portal loaded. Then it loaded wrong. The document categories I usually accessed were there, but one tier, the full merger deck category, the one I'd built page by page, showed a lock icon I hadn't seen before. I clicked it. Access restricted, contact system administrator. I closed the tab, opened a new one, logged in again. Same result. I sat with that for about 8 seconds. Then I opened a private notes document, plain text, no header, nothing that would look like anything to anyone who found it, and I typed Monday, 4:47 p.m., board portal, merger deck category, access tier, changed, permissions restricted, no notification received. I put a timestamp on it. I did not call the system administrator. I did not email corporate counsel. I did not say anything to anyone, because here is what 9 years in corporate rooms teaches you. The person who asks about a permission change before anyone has told them the permission changed is the person who looks like they already knew something was happening. I was not going to look like I already knew something was happening. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known that Monday evening, closing my laptop and putting the divorce papers in my bag still unread, was that the permission change had already happened 3 hours before any breach would be officially reported. The board didn't restrict my access because they'd been told about a leak. They restricted it before they were told. Or, and this is the part that took me 4 more days to prove, someone restricted it for them. Tuesday morning, I woke 40 minutes before my alarm. That happens sometimes when your body knows something your brain hasn't caught up to yet. I read the breach notice at 6:49, still in my car in the parking structure. I'd pulled it up on my phone before I walked in because corporate counsel had sent it at 6:58 the night before. No, wait, 6:58 a.m. Tuesday, before the market opened. That detail matters. I'll come back to it. The notice said a confidential M&A deck had been accessed outside the standard document management system. The board had been informed. A governance review was initiated. 3 short paragraphs. My name wasn't in it, but my access tier was the only one that covered the full merger deck category. Every person who knew this company's deal structure knew that. I sat in the parking structure for 4 minutes. Then I got out of the car and walked into the building. The first thing I noticed, the war room door was closed. 11 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days of that door being open whenever I needed it, and this morning it was closed. I could see through the glass that the board chair was already on a call, his back to the hallway, his hand moving in the specific gesture he uses when he's managing someone's concern rather than sharing it. He wasn't managing the deal team's concern. He was managing someone else's. I walked past the door without slowing down. I went to my office, sat down, set my bag on the desk, and opened my laptop. I pulled up the breach notice again and read it a second time, then a third. 6:58 a.m., before the market opened. Here's what that timing means. Corporate counsel sent a formal governance notice to the board of a public company before the trading day started, which means the goal was to have the board informed before the stock moved, before analysts started watching, before anyone with a Bloomberg terminal could connect a leak to a price shift. That's not a response to a crisis. That's crisis management that was already prepared. You don't draft a 3-paragraph governance notice at 6:40 a.m. unless you drafted it the night before. Someone wrote that notice before the leak was officially discovered, or the leak and the notice were part of the same plan. I didn't have the access logs yet. I didn't have proof of anything. What I had was a time stamped on a Monday evening portal restriction, a breach notice drafted before dawn, and a war room door that had been open for 356 consecutive mornings until this one. And I had 9 years of watching how this company moves when it's afraid. I picked up my phone. Not to call corporate counsel, not to call my own personal attorney. I have one. Everyone at this level does. I keep her number in my contacts under a name that doesn't explain who she is, which tells you something about how long I've understood that this business creates moments when you need a lawyer before anyone thinks you need a lawyer. I called Aiko Marlowe. Aiko, outside counsel, no internal allegiance, 30 years of reading what the record actually says instead of what the room wants it to say. I'd worked with her on 2 prior governance reviews. She had never once told me what I wanted to hear. She had always told me what the documents said. That is an extremely rare quality. Her phone rang twice. She answered on the 3rd ring, which meant she was already at her desk, 6:58 a.m. Notices have a way of landing on outside counsel's phones, too. I saw it, she said. Send me everything you have. I sent her the breach notice, my portal access screenshot from Monday, and the timestamp note I'd made at 4:47. 3 documents, 2 of them I'd created myself before anyone told me to. I'll request the full access history. Don't touch anything. Don't respond to anyone from the board directly. If corporate counsel reaches out, forward it to me first. I said, I know. And I did know. That's the part that I want you to understand before we go any further. I wasn't running blind into a process I didn't understand. I knew exactly what a fiduciary review looked like from the inside. I'd seen 2 of them at this company, neither of them about me. I knew the mechanics, I knew the timeline, and I knew the board, in a close window with a $4.8 billion transaction at stake, would not wait for verification before acting. They would act. Then they would verify. Corvin knew that too. Wednesday, I wore the Navy suit. Not because I knew what was coming. I knew something was coming. But I wore the Navy suit the way you wear armor when you're not sure what you're going to face, when the outside of yourself needs to be unambiguous while the inside is doing something much messier. 7:08, my normal arrival time. I came through the lobby, took the executive elevator, walked to the boardroom the way I had done, I counted once, I stopped counting, more than 200 times. Same hallway, same polished concrete floor, same glass walls catching the early light. My badge had worked every single one of those mornings. The display read, "Access denied." Flat red. No explanation, no error code, no contact system administrator. Just red. Just denied. Through the glass wall beside the door, I could see the boardroom, the confidential deal deck folder, dark blue, my initials in the metadata even though my name wouldn't show on the cover, was on the conference table. The board chair was already seated. Someone had brought coffee. The meeting had started without me, because as of some time in the last 18 hours, I was apparently someone who did not attend this meeting. I did not try the badge again. I took out my phone. I opened the camera. I photographed the access denied display, the timestamp visible in the phone's status bar reading 7:09 a.m. Wednesday, and I emailed it to Aiko, with no subject line. Just the image. She would know what it meant. She would know what to do with it. Then I walked back to my office, sat down, opened the plain text document, and typed, Wednesday, 7:09 a.m., badge access denied at boardroom entrance, photographed, sent to AM. 3 entries now. Monday's portal change, Tuesday's call, Wednesday's badge. At 7:22, my assistant came in. She closed the door behind her, which she does not usually do, which told me before she spoke that what she was about to say was something she didn't want the hallway to hear. The board chair's office called. There's a governance review session at 10. You're not on the attendee list. I thanked her. She left. I turned back to my screen. I want to be very clear about what I was not doing in that moment. I was not falling apart. I was not composing an email to Corvin. I was not calling the board chair's direct line to ask for an explanation that I already knew wouldn't come before the session started. I was sitting at my desk in my Navy suit, and I was building a record. Because the only thing I knew with absolute certainty, the only leverage I had that could not be taken from me by a permission change or a breach notice or a governance review, was the record. The record was clean. The record would say what happened. I just needed to give it time to be asked. At 10:03, a formal written notice arrived from the board chair's office. 3 paragraphs. Administrative leave, effective immediately, pending a fiduciary review related to the confidential leak. Access to all deal-related systems suspended. It did not name me as the source of the leak. It didn't need to. I had access to the full debt category. I was going through a divorce, publicly filed, publicly recorded, publicly legible as a governance instability. The board didn't need to prove I leaked it. They needed to establish that my proximity to the deck, combined with the divorce, created a risk profile they couldn't carry into the final 4 days of a $4.8 billion close. That was enough. In a deal window like this one, fear of a governance problem outweighs the cost of suspending one executive. Corvin had calculated this precisely. The board's fear was real. He just knew exactly how to feed it. I read the notice, forwarded it to Aiko, closed my laptop, put it in my bag, and then I stood up, put on my coat, picked up my bag, and walked out of my office, past the war room with its closed door and its whiteboard full of deal timelines I'd mostly written, down the hallway, into the elevator, and through the lobby. Not the executive elevator, the lobby, the front doors, past the security desk and the Huang Meridian nameplate above the entrance, and the marble floors I'd walked across so many mornings it had stopped registering as anything other than the beginning of a workday. I did not look at the cameras on my way out. I did not want them to have footage of my face in this moment. Because I knew, even then, with the notice in my bag and the badge that wouldn't work and the deal closing 4 days without me, I knew I was coming back. I just had to prove something first. Aiko's conference room has no view. I noticed that the first time I worked with her. A small room, white walls, one amber pendant light above the table, the kind of space that strips everything down to what's actually there. No city visible through the glass, no skyline telling you where you are in the hierarchy, just the table, the documents, and whatever the documents say. She had 2 documents laid out when I arrived Wednesday afternoon, the breach notice, Tuesday, 6:58 a.m., and the public divorce filing record, Monday, 11:34 a.m. She'd printed them both on plain paper, no letterhead. Side by side, they looked like evidence, which is what they were. Aiko, outside counsel, 30 years of reading what records actually say, drew a line between the 2 timestamps with her pen. Not a dramatic gesture, the way you draw a line on a document you've already decided matters. The board received the breach notice 14 hours after your divorce filing was public, she said. Tell me when you last accessed the deck. I opened the plain text document on my laptop. Still 3 entries, 3 timestamps I'd made myself before anyone told me I needed them. Monday, 4:47 p.m. Standard review. Through the board portal. My permissions were already restricted by then. I could see the document metadata but not open the full file. I noted it with a timestamp. She looked at my Monday entry, then at the breach notice. Then she wrote 1 word on her legal pad. I could read it from across the table. Which path? I want to tell you what that felt like, sitting in Aiko's conference room on a Wednesday afternoon with my laptop and my plain text document, and watching her write 2 words that meant the thing I had been slowly understanding since Monday evening was actually true. Not did she do it. That question was already answered. My access was restricted before I could have pulled the full file. The math was simple. What Aiko was writing, which path, meant the question had moved. It wasn't about my guilt anymore. It was about someone else's architecture. If your access was restricted by 4:47 Monday, you couldn't have pulled the full file after the filing. Someone accessed the full file through a different path. She set her pen down. The request for the complete access history is in the system. Every user, every timestamp, every IP path. We'll have it tomorrow. Tomorrow. Thursday. I remember thinking, he has until tomorrow to believe nobody's going to ask the question Aiko just wrote down. There's something that happens when you're inside a large institution and you've been there long enough to understand how it moves. You start to see 2 versions of every event. the version the institution tells itself, and the version the record actually shows. Most of the time, those versions are close enough that nobody notices the gap. But sometimes, when someone has specifically engineered the gap, the distance between them is exactly the size of a crime. I'd spent 9 years learning to read that gap. I just hadn't expected to be the reason it existed. While Aiko and I were in her conference room, the board was in an executive session 3 floors above us. Corvin was there. I know this because Aiko received a summary from the board chair's office, standard protocol for outside counsel during a breach review, the kind of procedural courtesy that keeps everything on record and everyone technically informed. She read it to me across the table, the session summary on her phone, her voice doing what Aiko's voice always does, delivering information without editorializing it. She said the divorce was difficult, but that the company had to act in the interest of the transaction. He expressed regret about the personal circumstances. He affirmed the board's responsibility to the deal and the shareholders. She set the phone down. He was not asked about his own system access. I sat with that for about 4 seconds. Here's what you learn when you've been in corporate rooms long enough. The COO is the most trusted person in a governance crisis because the COO is the person who is supposed to make the crisis manageable. He walks into a boardroom during a confidentiality breach, and the board looks at him the way you look at the person who knows where the circuit breaker is. You don't ask the electrician if he caused the outage. You ask him to fix it. Corvin had understood this. He walked into that session looking like the answer, and the board treated him like the answer, and nobody asked whether the question had a different shape than the one he'd given them. He knew they wouldn't ask, I said. Nobody asked the COO if he pulled a file during a divorce, because why would a COO leak his own company's deal deck? Aiko looked at me. Unless he wasn't leaking it. Unless he was moving the board, not protecting the deal. I want to be fair about the board chair for a moment, because the version of this where he's simply corrupt is easier to hold than the version where he's just human. He had a $4.8 billion transaction 4 days from closing. He had a divorce filing that created a governance headline his lawyers would spend a week managing. He had a COO standing in front of him looking composed and regretful and concerned about the company's interests, and he had an executive on administrative leave who, from where he was sitting, had both motive and access tier to justify the board's fear. He chose the path that closed the deal. He asked Corvin about stability and didn't ask him about access because asking Corvin about access would have meant slowing down a session he needed to complete before the trading day ended. That's not corruption. That's a man who let the most politically convenient story function as the governing fact because the governing fact was going to cost him time he didn't believe he had. Corvin had calibrated the situation precisely enough that the board's reasonable instinct, protect the deal, move fast, ask questions later, did his work for him. That is the part that took me longest to absorb. Not what he did, how little he had to do, because the institution was already moving in the direction he needed it to go. I don't sleep well when I know something is about to become real. Thursday morning, I was in Aiko's conference room by 7:40. She was already there. The access log printout was on the table. 18 pages, and she'd already been through it. She'd highlighted 4 lines in yellow. Not a page, not a section, 4 lines. I sat down. She didn't hand me the printout immediately. She looked at me for a second, the way Aiko looks at you when she's deciding how much framing you need before the information itself, and then she slid it across the table. The breach was flagged on a file poll that happened Sunday night at 11:22 p.m., before the divorce filing Monday morning. The path that pulled it is an administrative override credential. That credential set is registered to the COO's office systems management account, not to you. I read the 4 highlighted lines, the credential ID, the Sunday timestamp, the IP routing, all 4 of them, twice. Then I set the printout on the table, and I didn't say anything for a moment. Not because I didn't know what to say, because I'd known, somewhere in the architecture of everything that had happened since Monday, that this was what the record was going to show. And knowing it was coming doesn't prepare you for the moment it arrives in 18 pages with 4 lines highlighted in yellow and an outside counsel across a conference table waiting for you to absorb it. He pulled it before the filing was public, before I could have been afraid, before I had a reason to do anything reckless. Sunday night, when I was at home, reading the divorce papers I'd finally opened, thinking about what Monday was going to require of me, he was already in the system, already building the breach, already writing the cover story he was going to deliver to the board the next morning, wearing regret on his face. The divorce wasn't the trigger, it was the explanation. He needed something that would make the board afraid of me, specifically, precisely afraid of me, in a way that would survive scrutiny for exactly the 4 days required to close the deal without my name on the decision process. He needed a governance story the board could tell itself, and he needed to file the divorce before the breach notice arrived, so the sequence would read, divorce creates instability, instability creates leak risk justifies suspension. But the actual sequence was access the deck Sunday, file the divorce Monday, issue the breach notice Tuesday. He built the story in the order that would be believed, not the order in which it happened. If you build the strategy that makes a company worth $4.8 billion and the person who built it beside you uses that value against you before you even know the divorce papers have been served, does that make you naive, or does it make you the only person in the room who was actually working? I've turned that question over for 4 days now. There's no version of it that closes cleanly. The board suspended you based on a breach that happened before the divorce was filed. The access path doesn't match your credentials. If I present this timeline to the board review tomorrow, the leak doesn't point to you. She paused. It points to whoever had that override credential. I picked up the printout, 4 yellow lines, a credential ID, a Sunday timestamp, 11 months of work. And in the end, the thing that was going to save me was a timestamp on a Sunday night that didn't fit the story he told. Aiko sent me the full 18-page printout Thursday afternoon. I was at home, at my desk, the one I use when I'm not at the office, which is smaller and faces a wall rather than a window, which I'd always found less inspiring and now found exactly right. No view, just the work. I was on page 7 when I found it. My own credentials, Sunday, 3:14 p.m., a summary document in a related deal category, not the merger deck itself, not the confidential tier, a deal summary that sits adjacent to the main file and is accessible at a broader permission level. I'd reviewed it Sunday afternoon as part of my standard end-of-week check. Routine, something I'd done dozens of times across 11 months. But it put me in the system on Sunday, hours before the override poll at 11:22 p.m. I sat with that for a moment, not because I didn't know what I'd done. I knew exactly what I'd done. It was routine. There was nothing hidden about it. I sat with it because I understood immediately what the board would see if the presentation included it, and I understood immediately what the board would see if the presentation didn't. There's a version of this where Aiko presents the clean story, 4 highlighted lines, COO credentials, Sunday night, before the divorce. The board sees the breach path and follows it to Corvin, clear, efficient. And there's the version where the presentation includes page 7, my access, Sunday afternoon, 3:14 p.m. The board sees both of us in the system that day. They see the distinction, his credential, my credential, his category, my category, his time, my time, and they have to decide whether they trust the difference. I picked up my phone and called Aiko. There's a Sunday afternoon access on page 7 under My Credentials. It's a summary document in a related category, not the deck, but it puts me in the system that day. A brief pause. I already flagged it. It doesn't carry the deck data, but the board will see it. Put it in the presentation, I said, all of it, my access, the time, the document category, then put his beside it. Let the board see the full record. I didn't say I need to look clean. I said let them see everything because the difference between my Sunday access and his Sunday access is the whole case, and the only way that difference is legible is if both accesses are in the room. I won't tell you that choice was easy. I'll tell you it was the only one I could make and still be the person I needed to be when I walked into that boardroom Friday morning. That same Thursday morning, I'd sent an email to the senior analyst, 3 years on my team, someone who understood the deal documentation better than half the people in the war room, asking about a set of deal files I wanted to cross-reference for the log review, a routine request, the kind he'd answered within 20 minutes for 3 years. He didn't answer, not that day. I didn't blame him. The floor had already decided which way the power was moving. He was watching it the same way I'd watched rooms shift before I had enough standing to resist them. You protect yourself by reading the institutional current and not swimming against it. I'd done that in other companies and other rooms before I had what I have now, before I had what I was at that moment, fighting to keep. What the company now knew about itself, what the board's 3-day response had revealed, was that fear of losing a $4.8 billion close moves faster than 9 years of trust. And the analyst who didn't answer my email wasn't wrong to read it that way. He was just reading the institution accurately. I added a 4th entry to the plain text document. Thursday, own Sunday access identified on page 7, instructed full disclosure, AM presentation to include both access records side by side. Then I closed the document. The board review was Friday at 9 a.m. Corvin would be there. Aiko had submitted the access logs formally that afternoon, which meant by Friday morning, Corvin would know the logs had been pulled. He would know that Sunday's credential pull was in the record. He had one night to decide what he was going to say about it. I asked Aiko, "Will he show up?" Her answer came without hesitation. He'll show up. If he doesn't, the board asks why. He has no better move. I closed my copy of the printout. I didn't sleep well Thursday night, not because I was afraid, because a man who planned this carefully, who staged a breach, filed a divorce, and managed a board session all in the service of a 4-day window was not going to walk into Friday's room without a contingency. I just didn't know what it was yet. Friday morning, I wore the slate gray suit. Not armor exactly, more like the version of yourself that you put on when you need the outside to be absolutely unambiguous while the inside is doing something the outside cannot show. My badge flashed green at the executive floor entrance. The LED that had read access denied on Wednesday at 7:09 read green at 8:41 on Friday. 2 days. The same card, the same reader. I noted it the way you note a fact that means something and are not yet ready to feel what it means. Corvin was in the hallway outside the boardroom, phone in hand, finishing a call, which I recognized immediately as deliberate. Ending a call when someone arrives is a staging choice. It gives you something to conclude, a reason your face is composing itself, a small action that frames the transition from one mode to another. He saw me. He ended the call. He said, measured and low, "I didn't want it to go this way." I looked at him for exactly the length of time it takes to confirm that a person is performing sincerity for the glass walls and for anyone watching from inside the floor. 4 seconds, approximately. Then I said, "I know." That was all. I walked past him toward the conference room adjacent to the boardroom, where Aiko was already arranging the document presentation. I did not look back. I want to be clear about what "I know" meant. Not absolution, not forgiveness, not a concession that his regret was real or that it changed anything that had happened from Monday to Friday. "I know" meant I understand what you wanted, and I was in the way of it, and you made a calculation. That calculation is now in the record. We are both about to walk into a room where the record speaks for itself. There is nothing left for either of us to perform for each other. He knew that too. Aiko looked up when I came in. She had the presentation stacked in order, 5 documents, face down, to be placed one at a time. She said, "He's going to say the override credential was a routine administrative action, a standard deal room security sweep his office runs before close windows." I said, "Is there a record of those sweeps?" She said a single page on the table beside the stack. Every sweep run in the last 18 months. His office ran one in March. The next scheduled sweep was January. She tapped the page once with one finger. Sunday was not a sweep date. 6 documents now. 5 for the board, 1 for his defense already answered. I'd spent 5 days building the record before anyone told me to, and somewhere in those 5 days, he'd spent one night building a defense that the record had already anticipated. The gap between those 2 timelines, his one night versus my 5 days of timestamps and documentation and full disclosure, was the gap between someone managing a story and someone building the truth. The review began at 9 a.m. 9 a.m. 12 chairs around an oval table, the board chair at the head. Corvin 2 seats to his left, his default position in this room for 4 years. Aiko beside me. The board's corporate counsel at the far end, a legal pad open in front of him, pen in hand. The dark blue deal deck folder was already on the table when we sat. Someone had placed it there before the session began. I had built the strategy inside it. 11 months. Every page. Aiko placed her first document face up on the table. No introduction, no framing sentence. Just the page, set flat, readable. The breach notice, Tuesday, 6:58 a.m. Second document, the public divorce filing record, Monday, 11:34 a.m. Third, my portal access log from Monday, 4:47 p.m. Summary metadata only, full deck inaccessible, permissions already restricted. She placed each page the way you'd place evidence, not dropped, not slid, set. The room was quiet enough that the sound of each page landing was the only sound. The board chair had both hands flat on the table. Corporate counsel had stopped writing on his legal pad. Fourth document, the override credential pool, Sunday, 11:22 p.m. COO Office Systems Management account, full deck accessed. Corvin said, the credential set is shared across the COO's office systems. Administrative staff have access to it. Aiko reached for the 6th document, the one beside her presentation stack, the one I'd watched her place there this morning when she showed me the sweep schedule. She set it face up on the table, the credential access log showing that on Sunday at 11:22 p.m., the pool was authenticated by a 2-factor verification sent to a registered mobile number, the registered number. His number. Not a shared administrative credential activated by staff, a 2-factor authentication that required the registered device. 2-factor authentication requires the registered device, Aiko said. This credential use was verified on your phone. The room did not react loudly. It went quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet when the most powerful people in them have just understood something they cannot ununderstand and are deciding in the same breath what it means for everything that happened before. In a boardroom like this one, silence is the most expensive sound in the building. The board chair looked at Corvin, not with accusation, with the specific expression of a man who had just realized he asked all the wrong questions on Wednesday and now is understanding the cost of that. Corvin's face was composed. He was thinking, but there was nothing left to say that the documents hadn't already answered. He did not speak. The board chair turned to me. Is there anything you want to add? I had prepared for this question. I had considered on Thursday night while I wasn't sleeping what the right answer was. Not a speech, not a rebuttal, not a vindication that performed the relief I wasn't going to let this room see. I built the strategy in that deck. The access logs show I couldn't have pulled it when the breach happened. I've put everything I have in front of you, including the Sunday afternoon access under my credentials that I flagged myself. I didn't hide the uncomfortable detail. He moved the board before I could give you the record. Now you have it." The board chair nodded once. He did not look at Corvin again. Aiko placed the access log on top of the dark blue deal deck folder at the center of the table, her documents covering my work, covering his weapon. The session closed at 10:31 a.m. The session closed at 10:31 a.m. I was in the hallway alcove outside the boardroom at 10:47, one of those architectural details that expensive buildings include for people who need a moment between rooms. A window seat recessed into the wall, a narrow ledge of cushioned bench, just enough space to sit. I sat there. My bag was on the seat beside me. My badge was in my hand. The board chair came out at 10:52. He stopped when he saw me. He said quietly, "The board will issue a formal statement reinstating your role pending the close. The governance review of the COO's access will be handled separately." He paused. "You handled this correctly." I said, "Thank you." He nodded. He left. I looked at the badge in my hand. Green. Active. The LED that had read "Access denied" on Wednesday morning now existed only in a photograph I'd emailed to Aiko with no subject line. The same card, the same reader 3 floors down. The record had spoken. The board had listened. The governance review of Corvin's access was now a separate process, which is institutional language for something will happen to him eventually through the appropriate channel, which is the appropriate channel's problem now. I had what I came for. I had what I'd spent 5 days building, with timestamps and a plain text document and a call to outside counsel on a Tuesday morning before anyone suggested I needed one. And I was sitting in a hallway alcove down the corridor. The war room door was open. I could see the deal team through the glass. Movement, a whiteboard, someone rolling a chair from one side to the other. The close was proceeding. 11 months of work finding its conclusion in a room 3 doors down at 10:50-something on a Friday morning while I sat with a badge in my lap. The senior analyst stopped by the alcove at 11:04. 3 years on my team, the person who understood the deal documentation better than half the people in that war room, the person who didn't answer my Thursday morning email because he was watching which way the power was moving and making the calculation that everyone inside a large institution makes when the money is large enough and the outcome is uncertain. He said, "I heard. I'm glad." I nodded. He left. I didn't blame him. I want to be clear about that, not because I'm performing generosity, but because I understood exactly what he'd done and why, because I had done it myself in other rooms before I had enough standing to resist the current. You watch which way the power moves. You don't swim against it until you know you can win. That is not cowardice. That is survival inside an institution that processes fear faster than it processes loyalty. What the company now knew about itself, what this week had made visible, was that in a $4.8 billion close window, the institution moved faster than 9 years of trust. That is not a failure. That is how institutions function when the stakes are high enough. I'd built part of this institution. I'd watched it work. I knew how it moved. I just hadn't expected to be what it moved against. You stayed quiet. Trusted the record, the dare I gave you at the beginning. Of this, would you have done the same? The record spoke. The board listened. The governance review is in process. My name is in the strategy credits of a deal that closed, I would find out later, at 3:17 p.m. that same Friday. My access is restored. My badge is green. And I am sitting in a hallway window seat at 10:57 on a Friday morning while the war room door is open 3 doors down and nobody has come to tell me about it. Being right in the record is not the same as being safe in the institution. I know that now. I knew it before this week, in the abstract way you know things that haven't happened to you yet. Now I know it the other way, the way that doesn't leave. I looked at the badge one more time, then I clipped it to the outside of my bag, not inside where I wouldn't have to see it, but outside where I would. I was going to be in this building on Monday. I was not going to pretend this week hadn't happened, and I was not going to give the hallway cameras anything it could use. I stood up, I picked up my bag, I walked toward the elevator, not the lobby, the executive elevator. I had come in through the executive entrance this morning. I was leaving through it too. The week was over. The record was right. What came next was not the record's problem. It was mine. The close announcement went out to staff at 3:17 p.m. I was at my desk. Access restored, badge green, the slate gray suit still on because I hadn't gone home, and I hadn't thought about changing clothes because some part of me understood that changing clothes would be a kind of performance I didn't have the energy for. The announcement was 4 paragraphs. The transaction had closed, the board extended its appreciation to the deal team, the company was entering its next chapter. In the 3rd paragraph, in a list of acknowledged contributors, my name. The board chair had put it there, a quiet institutional acknowledgement, the kind that doesn't require a conversation because it exists in the record. I read my name, then I closed the announcement. Then I opened the original strategy deck, the one I'd built 11 months ago, the one that became the leaked file, the one that became the evidence, the ones whose access log was sitting in a boardroom file right now with Corvin's credential pool highlighted in yellow above it. I opened the executive summary, the first 10 pages, the argument I'd made for why this transaction was the right move at the right time for a company at this specific point in its trajectory. I read it the way you read something you wrote a long time ago, looking for the distance between the person who wrote it and the person reading it now. There wasn't much distance. It was good work. It had always been good work. My assistant set a coffee on the desk, the porcelain cup we keep for the office, not paper, and left without saying anything. She's been with me 4 years. She understood that this wasn't a moment that needed words. I held the cup. Through the glass wall of my office, I could see the war room door open, people moving. Someone had brought something from the bakery on the corner. I could see the white box on the far table, the kind of gesture that marks a close. The quiet celebration of a team that did what it came to do. Nobody walked to my office. I was reinstated at 10 a.m. The close happened at 3:17 p.m., 5 hours. Not enough time for the institutional reflex of celebration to recalibrate around my presence. The floor had adapted to my absence for 3 days and was now celebrating a close that my work had made possible, and the 2 facts, my name in the credits and my absence from the room, existed at the same time without contradicting each other. 9 years to build the strategic spine of this company, 3 days for the board to remove me, 5 hours to be reinstated, and the deal closed without me in the room. That math is what the company will never be able to fix by putting my name in a document. I held the coffee cup until it cooled. I didn't go to the war room, not because I was angry, I wasn't, or I was, but not in a way that would be useful to perform. I didn't go because the war room was in the middle of something that had its own momentum, and inserting myself into it 5 hours after reinstatement would have required everyone in that room to do an emotional calculation I didn't want to impose on them. I know how institutions work. I built part of this one. At 4:15, I read the executive summary a second time. Still good work. I closed the deck. I put my coffee cup on the side of the desk, and I started thinking about Monday. At 5:49, I took the executive elevator down. Not the lobby, the executive elevator. The same one I'd taken this morning arriving. The same one I'd bypassed on Wednesday when I left through the lobby because I wasn't going to give the hallway cameras a moment of collapse. Wednesday, I left through the lobby because I needed to leave without being seen as someone who was leaving. Friday, I took the executive elevator because I was done managing how I leave. The elevator has floor-to-ceiling glass on one side, city view, late autumn light, the specific amber gray of a late Friday afternoon in November, the kind of light that makes the city look like it's been running all week and is only now starting to slow down. The building's scale was visible as I descended, 22 floors of glass and steel and the Huang Meridian nameplate above the entrance I was about to walk through. I held the badge, not clipped, just held, the same way I'd held it in the alcove at 1047, the same card, the LED green. I thought about Monday at 4:47 p.m., the portal loading wrong, the restricted category, the lock icon I'd never seen before, and how I'd opened a plain text document and typed the first timestamp before I fully understood what I was doing, before I had a theory, before I had a lawyer, before I had anything except the instinct that said, write down what you see, exactly as you see it, before anyone tells you what to think about it. That instinct built the timestamps. It called Aiko before anyone suggested she was necessary. It photographed the badge denial and emailed it with no subject line because the image was self-explanatory and I knew it would need to be later. And that instinct, the one that documents, that anticipates, that trusts the record before the record is proven it can be trusted, is the same instinct that built the merger strategy, page by page for 11 months. The same kind of thinking. It is exhausting to be the kind of person who has to think that way inside the company you built. The elevator opened to the lobby. Marble floors, high ceilings, the Huang Meridian nameplate above the main entrance, the brass letters that have been there since the year I joined and will be there long after I'm gone, regardless of what happens in any boardroom on any Friday morning. I walked through the lobby, past the security desk where the guard nodded the way he always does, and through the front doors into the late afternoon. The city received me without ceremony, the way it always does, the way it receives everyone who walks out of this building at the end of a day, whether the day was ordinary or whether the day was the kind that changes the shape of everything after it. I stopped on the sidewalk. I took the badge in my hand, and I clipped it to the outside of my bag. Not inside where I wouldn't have to see it, but on the outside where I would, where I'd see it Monday morning when I picked up the bag, where it would be the first thing I looked at before I walked back into this building. I'm going back Monday, not because the institution is safe, not because the board will have forgotten what it believed about me for 3 days, not because Corvin's governance review will have resolved anything by then. I'm going back because I built part of what is in that building, because my name is in the strategy credits of a deal that closed today. The record is right, and I am not giving the company I built to the weak that tried to take it from me. That is not triumph. It is the next thing. Monday, I came in at 7 a.m., same time I always come in, same building, same lobby, the marble floors and the Huang Meridian nameplate above the front doors, the brass letters I've walked past so many mornings they stopped registering as anything except the beginning of a workday. The badge, red-green. I clipped it to my jacket this time, not my bag, my jacket, my body. I don't know exactly when I decided to do that, somewhere between Friday evening and Monday morning, in the days when the governance review of Corvin's access moved into its formal process and the board issued its reinstatement statement and the company continued, the way companies continue, efficiently and without ceremony, into the week after a close. I sat down at my desk. The plain text document was still in my files, 4 entries, archived, the record I built before anyone told me I needed one. I didn't open it. I opened the next project instead. The deal closed. My name was on it. I wasn't in the room. That's the sentence I've been trying to finish ever since. I've thought about what I would have done differently, whether staying quiet, trusting the record, trusting the timeline, trusting that the proof would arrive before the damage became permanent was the right call or the thing that made the damage possible. I don't have a clean answer. I'm not sure I'm supposed to. What I have is this, a company I helped build, a record that's right, a badge on my jacket instead of in my bag, and the specific understanding that being the kind of person who documents everything before anyone tells them to, who trusts the record before the record has proven it can be trusted, is both the thing that saves you and the thing that costs you. I built this company the same way I survived the week that tried to take it from me. That's not a coincidence. It's not a comfort either, but it's true, and I've decided that truth is enough to come back to on a Monday morning.
This is American Billionaire Tales, where fortune meets fate. Some records prove the truth. Not all of them change what the truth cost. Next time, a woman thought her divorce was about separating their lives, but she was wrong. She discovered someone had already started selling off the shares before the papers were even finalized. If this story sat with you, you're not alone in that. Drop what you think Sora does on Monday in the comments. If you want to be in the room when the next one breaks, subscribe. We'll be here.